Hey everyone, we were taking a look at Michelangelo and his changing style that we see with the Last Judgment and then also his two later Pieta pieces. Wanted to continue that theme to show you other styles that are happening throughout Italy at the time that demonstrate this changing style as a response to some of the wars and conflicts that are happening in Italy at the time, but also responding to the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation, which is the Catholic Church's response to Martin Luther and John Calvin in the North. Taking a look at Parmigianino, his father died from the plague when he was 2, and he traveled to Rome with 2 works of art. And these are the 2 works of art that he travels to Rome with. And this is kind of a form of self-advertisement of his talent. And he hoped that this would win him the graces of the new Medici Pope known as Clement VII. So he's hoping to become another kind of Pope painter like Raphael. He did this self-portrait when he was 21 years old. And this is just art that's for fun, right? So it's not necessarily has the weightiness or kind of the broodiness or darkness that we see with Michelangelo's Last Judgment or with his 2 Pietas, which are much more kind of emotionally intense. This is just art for art's sake. Can art just be fun? And that's another element of this Mannerist style, right? Kind of an early Mannerist piece that we see here. So again, Mannerism, some argue that it begins in 1520 with Raphael's death. Again, some people argue, well, maybe it's a little bit later than that, 1527 with the sack of Rome. Again, it's a little bit tricky. We talked about this in the previous lecture, how tricky it is to actually put a specific date or label on a specific art period and when one begins and when one ends. But what we see here, the main focus that attributes this to Mannerist style is the focus on virtuosity. This is showing off, at least specifically focusing on the self-portrait on the left. Where the Renaissance wanted to focus on how the eye sees, Mannerism is more about seeing what an artist can do, more about embellishment. And so, as we take a look at the painting on the right, the circumcision, this is taking a look at that idea of naturalism, but this is a little bit more extreme. The lighting is a little bit different. The colors are a little less natural. It almost seems like they're just kind of putting on an extreme filter. If you take a look at the bunny in the foreground, the bunny has this kind of light that radiates from its head. And I guess that light could come from the head of Christ. This kind of just beams and radiates from all around. But it's a little bit different than Raphael. It has Raphael's elements and style to it, that kind of soft lighting, but it's also a little bit different in terms of it's a little less naturalistic. This is just taking the idea of nature and suggesting maybe I can enhance it, I can add to it. He builds his self-portrait on a wood base to make it have this look as though it's on a convex mirror, to give it this sense that you're looking into a mirror, or he's kind of looking into a distorted mirror, to give it more of that sense of realism. But again, this is about an artist no longer just being a craftsman that just kind of creates something that can paint. This is about someone that's skilled and thoughtful and produces cultural artifacts that have insights. And so that's another major change. It takes the idea of the rising status of the artist that we see with Donatello, that we see with Leonardo and Michelangelo, and then with Raphael, kind of that raising status so that the artist has this kind of profound insights, and just kind of adds to that conversation. Now, artists aren't great just because they can mirror the world that God created. They're great because they can enhance and expand beyond it. And that's kind of more of a Mannerist idea, right? So just kind of connect these 2 works just to kind of suggest that Raphael is the symbol of the high Renaissance versus Parmigianino as we think about the stylistic differences between them. We can see the influence of Raphael, right? The kind of that earlier style, where he displays the soft, smooth lighting that dominates Raphael's work. We can kind of see that continue on with Parmigianino. But this is more about the scientific study of how the eye sees and how images can be bent and distorted by light and glass. And so it's more about the artist kind of showing off of what we can do as we can distort reality. But we see on the right-hand side with Raphael, Sistine Madonna. On the left-hand side, this is Saint Sixtus, who is a 3rd century saint, and Saint Barbara, who was the daughter of a wealthy pagan, converted to Christianity, when her father was away on business and returned and found out that she was converted. He brought her before a tribunal, and she was sentenced to be tortured. And each day her wounds were miraculously healed, and then she was later beheaded by her father. And then that's kind of a common theme that we see about, particularly about women saints, is that they were converted, and then they were tortured for their beliefs, and then they were beheaded. And then her father died on his way home, being struck by a lightning bolt. And so St. Barbara is represented there. Again, this is just a represent. We've seen Mary, we've seen baby Jesus, we've seen them surrounded by saints, and then I love the angels. I think a lot of Raphael, if you just kind of Google Raphael, I think you'll see these kind of melancholy, kind of quasi-bored kind of angels as they kind of look off into the eternities. They have no cares. Again, this is about Raphael, not really depicting the world around him, but people that are apart from the world. And here we see Sixtus and Barbara that are kind of ascended up into this kind of heavenly cloud. We see the screen that kind of pulls back as though this is some type of divine theater that reveals Madonna and baby Jesus. And so the idea of he kind of shows this spiritual escapism of escaping from the cares and concerns of the world, and so there are no concerns here. And we see that a little bit of that with Parmigianino, kind of moving away from reality, but he's doing that moving away from reality, not actually physically away as he's kind of in this mythological bubble that Raphael represents, but more of moving away from reality in terms of the creation of their aesthetic, right, of the visual reality, right? This one is what he's most known for, Madonna with a long neck, which is kind of a similar theme, a similar motif that we've seen before on the bottom. In the bottom center, you see Michelangelo's. This is known as the Holy Family. So you see Joseph in the background, Mary in the foreground, and then baby Jesus kind of on Mary's shoulder and Joseph's knee, kind of surrounding them. And then you have these angels that kind of surround them in a similar way that we see to Raphael, kind of apart from the world. The angels kind of demonstrate this kind of Greco-Roman kind of gods, goddesses, kind of moving away from the world in this timeless kind of harmony. We've seen Madonna, baby Jesus, John the Baptist, and the goldfinch before as well. We've kind of talked about that. So a similar motif, but Parmigianino takes that and then he expands beyond it. This one is his kind of representation of that theme, but it's a little bit different. It's a little bit odd because as you take a look, baby Jesus is much too big. He looks like he's more of a toddler who, wouldn't be necessarily held in that way. Notice how also it's a little bit less realistic in terms of there's nothing to support the bottom half. So similar to Michelangelo's early Pieta in 1498, there's nothing to support the bottom half. He kind of, Parmigianino kind of takes that theme and kind of carries it forward. And so it gives baby Jesus this sense of lightness, this kind of floating quality. Mary here is not really seated on a throne as we normally see her. She's kind of sitting down, but it's more of kind of this exercise squat, like she's exercising. It's like leg day or something. And so she's just kind of bending down as though kind of graciously, and a pillow gently kind of holds her right foot up. But again, it's as though she's just kind of light and airy. Notice how all of the weight is going to be supported on those 3 toes on her left foot, which wouldn't physically be possible, but it's only possible in this sense. Notice how also the distortion of Mary, her fingers are too elongated. They're much too long. Her neck, the reason why it's called the Madonna with a long neck, it distinguishes it from all the other Madonnas and baby Jesus, is she has a long neck, right? Much too long to be realistic. And her hips are also too wide, but that's to compensate for the large body of Jesus. Notice how the lighting is also a little bit off. It seems as though Jesus kind of radiates without really a lighting source. And then on the far right hand, some of you are kind of wondering what's going on there. In the far right hand corner, that is John the Baptist, and his job is always to point towards Jesus. And so he's reading the scriptures and pointing people towards Jesus. And he's kind of off in the background. He looks kind of like a fun-sized version of John the Baptist. But that's just to kind of show the idea of depth. And then you have the Greco-Roman columns in the background, but notice how the work is not finished, and so he never really finished this work, and so you don't really see the rest of the kind of Greco-Roman temple in the background, and then you have all the children coming in to present gifts to Jesus. But he kind of takes this theme of the early Renaissance and then kind of this Mannerist style of Michelangelo and kind of does his own kind of theme with it. We've seen this idea before with Mary kind of combined with Jesus. But this is, art history or art that's taken from art rather than taken from nature, right? So with the Renaissance, we see art taken from nature. But here we see art taken from art, and so it's as though he's paying homage to these two pieces of Michelangelo and representing them kind of in another way, right? Placing themselves as a discussion for art rather than just being shackled by reality. And so in comparison, in these two works, they demonstrate kind of one of the major principles of Mannerism is just doing art for art's sake, showing the virtuosity of the artist, showing what an artist can do. Now, if we take a look at these ideas in Venice, we see some different ideas starting to emerge in terms of Mannerism. This was done late in Titian's life. It was intended for his own tomb, but it was incomplete and finished after he died, and then they didn't put it where he wanted to do it. It was originally intended for the Church of Ferrari in Venice, and it has two other paintings by Titian there, the Assumption and the Bessario Madonna, but it was not added to the tomb. It was going to be against the wall where the viewer can kind of approach it from an angle. But then it was not necessary. It wasn't put in that location. In terms of the painting itself, the painting shows Saint Jerome on the far kind of the front right-hand side. He was an early Christian writer who was synthesizing a lot of Catholic ideas, kind of summarizing a lot of Christian thought. Then we see Jesus and Mary, which we've seen before, right? So again, this kind of idea of the Pietà. Kind of coming together of the dead body of Jesus and Mary mourning the loss. And then we see Mary Magdalene. Saint Jerome is believed to be a self-portrait of Titian, so he kind of inserts himself similar to what Michelangelo does. The two statues, this is Moses, seen with the horns, and then the two tablets, kind of as the lawgiver, the person that's suggesting these are the laws, these are the decrees, again as a response to the Reformation. This is suggesting this is what the Catholic Church has built on, these commandments, and anyone that violates them is violating the commandments of God. So it's again as a way to kind of combat the rising stem of the tide of the Reformation in the North. And then on the left-hand side, this is a pagan who prophesied of the coming of Christ. And so as a Sibyl, she becomes kind of this prophetess. But these both together are part of the older pagan and Jewish traditions. And so this idea of the Renaissance going back to the Greco-Roman ideas and going back to Judaism, these ancient ideas, bringing them forward to show harmony, that the Catholic Church is in harmony with these older traditions, right? So that's kind of the underlining message of Titian as an artist. These figures appear to emerge out of the darkness. Notice how they're kind of this darkened image, but they appear to emerge out of it. Christ has this light unto himself, as though they have this spiritual light. There is a painting at the bottom right corner of Titian and his son over here. And behind this is their family crest. And so it demonstrates kind of the symbol of Titian and his importance. And so this was supposed to be at his burial site. Just to take a look at a couple more images of kind of the response to the Reformation in Italy and the Mannerist style. This is known as the Feast of the House of Levi. However, it was originally titled the Last Supper. So you can see Christ at the very center, surrounded by apostles. However, the Catholic Inquisition summoned Veronese to them to defend his work. And they were offended that the Last Supper would include jesters, Germans, people that they were fighting with in Germany, and others that shouldn't be part of this kind of more sacred scene of the Last Supper, right? Typically, when art places contemporary people in sacred places, it shows the piety of the contemporary people. And that would mean, if they're putting Germans in this work, it would mean that Germans were allowed to witness this sacred event, And right now, Italy is strained relations with Germany due to the Reformation and Charles V and his claim to Italy. So they're a little bit upset with the Germans at the time. And so they were supposed to be supposedly evil, and they rejected Catholicism. And so the Pope is saying you can't put them in this religious image here. So Veronese it's decided to just retitle the painting. So now it's just known as the Feast of the House of Levi, which they were fine with, right? They said, okay, fine, that's fine. Notice how the architecture is so immense that the figures become obscure. Notice how the arches provide spaces that break between the three scenes, and so the scene here, the scene over here, and then the scene of the actual supposedly Last Supper at the very center. On the outskirts of the Last Supper, we have contemporary dressed Venetians. Venetians were global traders. So we see them and kind of see the Venetian trader here at the foreground. Seen coming together. Germans are at the front in the right over here. People are wearing turbans on the left over here, right? And so this was kind of a place of banquet. Venice was kind of the place where the world meets. And I think his idea was that Christianity is for the world, the Last Supper should be for everyone. I think he was this idea of kind of coming together. But since the Catholic Church, due to the Council of Trent, was cracking down on art, they said, we're not so sure about that messaging. Yes, the Catholic Church is supposed to be for everybody, but we're not so sure how comfortable we feel with that at the moment. And so he just said, okay, it's just a banquet, right? But this shows this idea of banning, right? This idea of censorship that's happening as a result of the Catholic Church and the Counter-Reformation. They felt that it would be too distracting, and it didn't emphasize the church enough, the church's message. And so this is different from Raphael's School of Athens, different time, where the church had a different mindset when they were saying, hey, these Greco-Roman ideas should go right in the Vatican. That's fine. The church has a very different mindset now with the Reformation kind of feeling threatened. This is a return to orthodoxy, right? This is returning to tradition against the rising religious kind of movement away. And so in some ways, it's kind of a return to religious extremism. Notice the cat under Peter's feet, seen here. And then the dog that watches the cat, just kind of watching on. Kind of an interesting scene of kind of coming together in this collaboration. And again, similar to other Mannerist works, is very similar to the Last Judgment, that it's really busy, right? A couple of detail images of kind of Peter's just kind of digging into the meal, this kind of Last Supper, and Christ kind of leaning over. You can see the kind of the subtle halo above his head as he teaches and instructs. And then you see the jester here, which people would say that's a form of low entertainment, that's lowbrow, but so that shouldn't be here in terms of the Last Supper. And then you see the Venetians, and then people throughout the world kind of coming together and gathering together. And then just want to take a look at one last work. This is Tintoretto, it's the Last Supper. So again, continuing on with the theme of the Last Supper, and we'll kind of think about this in more detail in our Zoom meeting. This one the Catholic Church was fine with, right? Because this was much more focused and direct on the Catholic message of reinstituting the sacraments, that the sacraments was important. And the idea for this was that the Church had the authority to institute the sacrament, and so they wanted to reassert their authority through the importance of sacraments, right? So this was Christ standing at the very center, and he has this light that radiates from within him, and he's offering his body, right, his flesh and blood to his apostles in this Last Supper. And then you have this kind of heavenly light that shines down, and kind of this lamp here. And then you have these angels that kind of emerge, that burst forth from the light and go off into the darkness of the world to provide this kind of angelic spiritual experience. And notice how the attendants here, which is interesting to me, the attendants are just kind of washing dishes and kind of preparing the feast. This kind of cat here is just interested in what's going on over in here. Kind of this kind of separation from the divine, what's happening here, and then what we've called it the profane or the secular world seen here, and kind of this kind of duality. So he kind of separates them visually, but it's a demonstration, it's an importance of the Last Supper of the sacraments and why the sacraments are important. So what we've seen a couple of different examples of Mannerism in terms of stylistically, right? So stylistically, we see a lot more complexity. There's much more in terms of this specific image as well. We see a lot more lighting contrast that we generally didn't see within the Renaissance. The Renaissance shows very bright, vibrant images that are peaceful, that are balanced, that are serene. This particular composition is off-center, kind of giving you that feeling that the focus is rather than on the horizontal and the vertical, this is much more on that diagonal line, which makes it much more dynamic. We see here an emphasis rather than on natural lighting, on natural elements, we see is unnatural lighting, supernatural elements of the angels coming in with their wings, kind of that Mannerist style. Another part of Mannerism that we see of Parmigianino is expanding beyond visual reality, elongating the neck, or demonstrating the convex mirror, the principles of an artist, demonstrating what a style of what an artist can do. And so Mannerism kind of takes the ideas of the Renaissance and suggests maybe we can do something beyond just visual reality and do something a little bit different and add our own style to it. And so Mannerism is much more of an individual style, with each artist doing something a little bit differently, adding to, expanding beyond nature, and finding their own artistic voice.